It is so good to be able to see you. You know, here there was this woman that was very bright, very smart, but she believed that she had learned everything that she possibly could from the city that she lived in. So she thought that what she was going to do was she was going to go out and begin to explore the lands that were around the area which she lived so that she could learn some more. And so as she did, she went out and she came upon this land that was really covered by these castles. And it had a wall all around this city. So she thought, here's what I'll do. I'll go into this city, and when I go into this city, I'm going to be able to learn everything I need to learn. These people are going to be able to teach me so much. And so when she went in there, she began to ask people, how is it that you've learned as much as you have, that you can be as bright as you are? But yet she got no response because of the people inside that city seemed to be so frightened, so afraid. They were so sad. And so she asked the question. She said, why are you so sad? Why are you so depressed? Why is it that you just don't seem like you're really living up to everything that you seem to be? And they said to her, well, today's the day. She said, today's the day? They said, yeah, today's the day that your giant comes. And she said, oh, there's no such thing as giants. And they said, oh, but yes, there is. There are some giants. He stands over 10 feet tall. And every year on the same day he comes. And today is the day. She said, well, how can I see this giant? And they said, well, the only way that you can see this giant is if you face him. Because he comes every year, and he said, send out your bravest person so that I'll kill him today. And if you don't send him out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to destroy the entire city. I'll come inside, knock down the walls, and I'll kill everyone that's inside. And the woman was curious, and so she said, well, I'll go out there because I want to see this giant. I'll fight him for you. And sure enough, all of a sudden, she heard the giant's voice. It came all the way from across the field, but that voice seemed to be so loud it came over the city walls. And so here she was. She went out to the city. And when she went out of the city and she went into the meadow where it seemed like the giant's voice was coming from, sure enough, he was there. But he was so far away. And yeah, it was true. He was a giant. And between them, there was a little rise in the land, so she couldn't see his whole form. All she could see was the top half of his body. And when she saw the top half of his body, yes, it was true. He was surely 10 feet tall. Knowing that she had to face him in order to be able to do what she said she would do, because she thought about going back into the city and locking the gates. But she said, I've given my word. I've given my word. I need to face the giant. And so she began to walk toward him. And when she began to walk toward this giant, she saw his full form. And when she saw his full form, she didn't think he might be quite as big as she initially thought. And as she continued to walk up that hill, she began to see him. And interestingly enough, he didn't seem quite as big as she thought in the beginning. As she continued to walk, it seemed as though that he got smaller. And when she continued to walk and he began to get smaller, he was walking toward her and she was walking toward him. She began to go faster, and the terror that she had turned into possibly that there was a chance that she could be able to kill him. She could get rid of this giant that had been plaguing this city for so long. But then, as she got a little bit closer, it seemed as though that he continued to get a little bit smaller. And as he got smaller, she began to pick up her pace. And when she began to pick up her pace, all of a sudden, he went from 10 feet tall to 12 inches tall, and they stood toe to toe. And there he was, 12 inches tall, and she decided to pick him up in the palm of her hand before he vanished away and became a grain of sand that could be blown away by the wind. And she said, "Who are you?" He said to the Chinese, "My name is Konju." To the Greeks, "My name is Phobos." But to you and your kind, I'm called fear. Fear plagues every person at one level or another. What is it that you're afraid of? What are you afraid of? I would ask for a show of hands. I would ask for people to be able to tell me what it was that they feared. But yet, at the same time, I wouldn't want to do that. And the reason why that I wouldn't is because we sometimes hold on to fear so closely that we just don't want anyone to know. We wouldn't tell anyone. We wouldn't be open enough. We'd be afraid. And so there are some things I want to talk to you today about fear. Some things that I know that are really going to be able to be helpful to you. And really, let me ask you this question. Or let me mention this. You see, fear is as natural as thinking. In fact, fear is merely one of the many consequences of our ability to think. When you think that through, it's to create our reality moment by moment. Our ability to think creates our reality moment by moment. You see, when people fear, they're living in the feeling of their thinking, not the thinking of their circumstances. Isn't that interesting? When people fear, they're living in the feeling of their thinking, not the thinking of their circumstances. Here's some quotes about fear that I thought that you might find to be a little bit interesting. Ruth Gendler said this. She said, "Fear has a large shadow, but he himself is small." Here's something that I wrote for you. No one is afraid of heights. They're afraid to fall. No one is afraid to play. They're just afraid to lose. No one is afraid of the dark, but they are afraid of what might be in it. No one is afraid to say, "I love you." They're just afraid of what someone else might say in response. You see, fear is faith that it won't work out. Sister Mary Tricky told us that. Or Tricky Mary. Christopher Cohen said, "Fear cannot take what you do not give it." You see, friends, fear causes a man to hide, even to run from the very things that he desires. It started all the way back in our beginning. There in the book of Genesis, chapter 3, verse number 4, and I only want to talk about a couple of things. Here it was, "And the serpent said unto the woman, You'll not surely die, for God does know in the day that you eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil." You know, girls, let me ask you a question. What is the number one thing that you want? It's security. You want to be secure. You won't even marry that guy until you know he's making enough money. That's the reason why you say you don't want to get married, until someone comes around with enough money to be able to make sure that they can take care of you. But think about that for just a moment when you think about the garden. The very thing that had to have happened is this. You see, I know what happens to others based upon what seems to happen to me. What happened to her? What happened to her was this. She found more security in believing that God wouldn't come through than that he would. You see, when people fear, they find more security in believing that things won't work out than they will. Do you know over 70% of things have absolutely no basis for truth that people are afraid of? There are 20% that actually are circumstances, but yet at the same time, those circumstances, most of the time, they work the way that they should. The 10%, which are really seemingly in the middle, it's only a couple of percent of those things that actually really do happen. But isn't it interesting that when people fear, when people believe, can you imagine? Here it was in the garden that the very, very woman that God had taken out of the side of man, that she actually was more secure in gossip of what someone else told her than she was secure in the very thing that God had said. Sometimes we get caught by that, don't we? And then God came in the cool of the day, and his voice. See, because God's cool. So he came in the cool of the day, and God came and he said, Adam, he said, where are you? Because the moment that people are afraid, God's looking for them. And really what it is that they're looking for God just as well. And he said to him, he said, Adam, where are you? Because fear causes you to lose your transparency. It causes you to lose the truth. It causes you to lose being opened by things. So what are you afraid of? Because God hasn't done any of this to you. No matter where you are today, no matter whether it seems as though that your relationship with God is tremendously vibrant, or it seems as though that your heart has grown cold and all you're hearing are those things that keep you away from God, not those things that are drawing you towards him. Do you realize that even Christians can run into that same spot? That whatever they're truly listening to is really what's causing them to react, not necessarily what God really said. May you never get caught by that one. And so, what is it that you're afraid of? Because God hasn't done this to you. I've spent the last couple of days listening to the book of Psalms. Just listening to them. And when I do, I listen to them much of the time at 1.5 speed, sometimes at 2 times the speed, so that I can get all of those things inside my head because I read at least that pace. And so, as I'm listening to this, all I'm seeing as I read the book of Psalms is that David is questioning whether or not that God was going to come through for him. But there was one thing that was an overarching truth in the entire book, and that was that David was not going to believe anything except that God was ultimately on his side. In Psalm 118, verse number 6, he said this. He said, the Lord is on my side. Say this, the Lord is on my side. I will not fear. What can man do to me? Boy, that's really true, isn't it? I mean, think about it. Think about getting rid of all of the fears, all the things that you've been believing, all those things that seem to be talking to you every day. whether or not the bills are paid, whether or not they're not, whether or not a person's been faithful, or whether or not that they haven't been, whether or not that you're going to be able to have something in the future, or whether you're not. All of those things that seemingly speak to us. That's the tough part. But how about this? Think about when you first believe. Go back. I remember Andre Crouch sang that song so many years ago. And by the time that I had been a believer for just, even less than a year, Andre came out with that song. And he said, take me back to where I first believed. Because when you first believed, things were so simple, weren't they? All it was that I just believed that God was going to come through. Everything about him was so true. I didn't fear anything because I knew that somehow, some way, God was going to work it out. He was going to make it happen. I don't know. Someone says, well, how do you think that this is going to happen? Oh, it doesn't matter. All of it doesn't matter the way that it's going to work out. All I know is that it's going to. Say everything is going to work out. I'm not worried about it. How true is that? That's really, really true. So David said that. But then we go on and we find another writer who said many of the very same things, only in a deeper way. Paul said this. He said, what can we say about such wonderful things as these? If God be for us, who can ever be against us? Since God did not spare even his own son, but gave him up for us all, won't God, who gave us Christ, also give us everything else? Can you imagine that there are people who believe that God would give Jesus, but yet he wouldn't get you a new car? That God would give you Jesus, but he wouldn't lead you and guide you into the truth? That God would give you Jesus and still he wasn't enough to be able to make the situations around you even better? Oh, that isn't true, friends. He said, if God be for us, who can be against us? And if God gave us Christ, he'll also give us everything else. But now notice this. He said, who dares accuse us whom God has chosen for his own? Will God? No. He's the one who has given us right standing with himself. Who then will condemn us? Will Christ? No. Because he's the one who died for us and was raised to life for us and is sitting at the place of highest honor next to God, pleading for us. Say God. In Christ. Is pleading for me. Can you imagine that? He said, can anything ever separate us from Christ's love? Does it mean he no longer loves us if we have trouble? Or we have calamity? Or it seems as though that we're persecuted? Or we're hungry? Or cold? Or in danger? Or threatened with death? Even the scriptures say, for your sake we're killed every day. We're being slaughtered like sheep. He said, no. He said, despite all of these things, overwhelming victory is ours through Christ who loved us. He said, and I'm convinced, I am, that nothing can ever separate us from his love. Death can't, and life can't. The angels can't, and the demons can't. Our fears for today and our worries about tomorrow, and even the powers of hell can't keep God's love away. He said, whether we're high above the sky or in the deepest ocean, nothing in all creation will ever be able to separate us from the love of God that is revealed in Christ Jesus, our Lord. You see, you need to understand something. No matter where you are, no matter if you've ever been to a place to where you've made the commitment to Christ, I think that many of us at times have become very, very Christianized. But we stopped being a Christian. That we've begun to embrace churchianity and given up Christianity. It's a different thing. You see, it's important for us to understand that not only does God love us, but God is in love with us. You see, it's not something that goes away. It's something that lives on and on and on. There was someone who texted me the other day and who asked me about one of the posts that were made on Instagram. They asked me the question, what does it mean that love is the willingness to endure, not the permission to allow? He said, I don't understand that. It's very simple. Is that God's love for my life is Him being able and being willing to endure the challenges which I face in life. But that doesn't mean that He changed it all to give me permission to allow those things to go on. His feelings remain the same, but yet He is still in love with me. It's not just that He loves me. You see, many times people talk about God's love, but they don't really talk about God being in love with you. Because that's where He is. He is in love with you. So that you can wash away and wipe away all of the years and the buildup that has come on your life. No matter where it is, that I need to do this and I need to do that. And there's 14 things that I need to do. But none of those things are important until you finally come to the place to where you begin and always leave it at the place that God is in love with you. He just doesn't love you. He is in love. And when those things don't touch us, that means that what we've done is that we've actually exchanged Him being in love with us for something else that seemingly gives us security. Just something else that is talking louder. You need to do this. You need to do that in order for me to be in love with you. You see, God's love is His willingness to endure, not His permission to allow. In the book of John, John was very interesting when John told us in chapter 3, verse number 16, a verse that you learned while you were in children's church, or you may have never heard it before. This may be the first time that you've ever heard this. Can you imagine if this was just the first time that you ever heard this? What this would say? How this would make you feel? How you actually could live if this was the first time that you ever heard it? I remember all of those years ago when it was the first time that I ever heard it. That Linda told me, she said, do you know the only time that I've ever seen you happy for the time that I've ever known you was the moment that you were telling someone else about God's love for them. That God was in love with them. It wasn't just another sentence. It actually became the very truth upon which a person can live the rest of their life. You see, one day, on October the 28th, all of those years ago, when I knelt down on that cement floor. That day, the rest of my life had been cast. There wasn't anything else that I needed to do. I knew from that moment forward, I'd found where my home was. Because I knew that God was in love with me. That He just wasn't trying to judge me over something that I apparently didn't do, or how I didn't measure up. And I was afraid I wasn't good enough. And there's even a name for that. To be afraid that you weren't good enough, that you didn't have enough, that you didn't measure up enough. So John said this, "For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever would believe in Him would not perish, but he would have everlasting life." See, for God did not send His Son in the world to condemn the world, but that the world through Him might be saved. Can you imagine that? That God did not send His Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through Him might be saved. Today, I'm not here to condemn you. I'm not here to pass any judgment upon you. It's not my life. It's not what I'm called to do. My responsibility is to be able to just continue to tell you about how much God cares.
If you are in the Chicago area, we would love for you to join any of our services. We have a 5 p.m. service on Saturdays, and on Sundays we have a 9:30 a.m. and 5 p.m. service. We also have midweek services on Wednesday at 7:15 p.m. at locations around Chicago and Northwest Indiana. To find out more about FHC, like us on Facebook or go to our website at FHClife.org. To partner with RTM, visit robthompson.org/partner or call our office at 708-614-6000. We look forward to seeing you very soon.